Ecological communities have a spatial boundary and likewise have a spatial context within the larger landscape. Observing a view of a particular landscape is like looking at a mosaic artwork, wherein one views a combination of patchwork of forest, fields, golf course, hedgerows, pine plantation, pond, human habitation, and the likes. By contrast to such artwork, the landscape mosaic is dynamic. The structural and functional components of the landscape interact in a variety of ways depending on their size and spatial arrangement, and as is, change through time. This is a video discussion on landscape dynamics. The following are the topics to be discussed. This video is divided into 4 parts. A variety of processes gives rise to landscape patterns. In viewing a landscape, we notice the composition, the types of land cover or communities, the patches, and their arrangement in the area or space. The spatial structure of each landscape is unique and results from the interactions of a variety of factors including abiotic, biotic, natural disturbances, and human activities. Climate and geology interact to define the landform, determining patterns of drainage, erosion, and deposition. These abiotic factors influence the geographic distribution of species, which together with species interaction determine changes in species composition and community structure across the landscape. The distinct patterns of communities that we see in the landscape, as well as the species inhabiting them, are heavily influenced by both past and present natural disturbances. A disturbance is any relative discrete event, such as fire, windstorm, flood, extremely cold temperatures, or drought, that disrupts community structure and function. Disturbances both create and are influenced by patterns on the landscape. Natural disturbances are not limited to physical processes. Biological processes can also function as disturbances. Beavers modify many forested areas in North America and Europe. By damming streams, beavers alter the structure and dynamics of flowing water ecosystems. These actions of beavers creates a diversity of patches within the larger landscape. The fragmentation of larger continuous tracts of habitat such as forests, shrubland, or grassland into a mosaic of smaller, often isolated patches are often the result of human activities. Habitat fragmentation describes the emergence of discontinuities in an organism's preferred environment, causing population fragmentation and ecosystem decay.
Habitat fragmentation is caused by two things: humans and natural events, the former making up a larger percentage of the causes behind this problem. Within these two categories, research has shown 3 different types of habitat fragmentation. Those are habitat isolation, habitat degradation, and habitat subdivision.
19.2 Landscape pattern is defined by the spatial arrangement and connectivity of patches. A landscape is a spatially heterogeneous area, a mosaic of elements referred to as patches. Patches are areas that are more or less homogeneous compared to their surroundings. The communities that surround a patch constitutes its matrix, while boundaries are the place where the edge of one patch meets the edge of another adjacent patch or surrounding matrix. There is one additional feature that defines the structure of the landscape, which is the spatial arrangement of the patches, their context within broader landscape. The proximity of patches to each other influences the ability for interactions among patches to occur. This is called their connectivity. One feature of the landscape that can increase connectivity is the presence of corridors, which are routes that facilitate movement between patches. Landscapes are therefore comprised of 3 main elements: patches, boundaries, and corridors, and all are embedded in a matrix. 19.3 Boundaries are transition zones that offer diverse conditions and habitats. The place where the edge of one patch meets the edge of another is called a boundary, which is an area of contact, separation, or transition between patches. Some boundaries are stable and permanent, while some are typically transient. There are many types of boundaries. Some boundaries between landscape patches are narrow, short, and abrupt. Others are much broader, forming a transition zone called an ecotone between the adjoining patches. Moreover, boundaries may vary in length and may be straight, convoluted, or perforated. Boundaries offer unique habitats with relatively easy access to the adjacent communities. As a result, boundaries are often populated by a rich diversity of life. This phenomenon, called the edge effect, is influenced by the area of boundary available and by the degree of contrast between adjoining plant communities. In general, the greater the contrast between adjoining patches, the greater the diversity of species. Therefore, a boundary between forest and grassland should support more species than would a boundary between a young and a mature forest. Although edge effects may increase species diversity, it can also create problems. Narrow and abrupt boundaries appear to be attractive to predators because predators often use edges as travel lanes, which increases rates of predation in edge habitats as compared to the interior of habitats. Boundaries can further alter interactions among species by either restricting or facilitating dispersal across the landscape. For example, dense, thorny shrubs growing in the boundary of forests and fields can block some animals from passing through. Moreover, plant species change as size and the environmental conditions within the boundary changes, and competitive interactions among boundary species increase. This is the end of part 1. Part 2 will be linked in the description box.